Hello. Hi, everyone. If we could take our seats, we'll now get into the next sessions. And Daniel, is this yours?
Yes.
Okay.
I just put it there.
No. I was just making sure. I'm good. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for, of course, joining us for the follow-on. I have a lot to say about the previous session, but I'll let that jump into the roundtable discussion. Right now, I'd like to introduce Daniel, who's from OpenID or Open Wallet Foundation, and is going to do a presentation on open source wallet development.
Thank you very much. It was a really interesting presentation. I learned the difference between Jean-Jacques Rousseau and the DA in the United States, whether the nature of man is good or bad. And I have a lot of time on the flight back to ruminate about that. I want to tell you about something that is a lot probably lighter-hearted and less controversial, and essentially tell you why we believe that open source software is really critical for secure, interoperable wallets. Unfortunately, the clicker is not working, so we will have to suffer through. If you could go to the next slide, please. This is probably not important for this meeting, but if you are interested to cooperate on software for interoperable wallets, please follow best antitrust practices and do not use that to collude, as a friendly reminder of the Linux Foundation, which is my partner in crime when it comes to the Open Wallet Foundation. Next slide, please. So before talking about wallets, let's take a quick excursion to web browsers. Give me a couple of examples. Which web browser are you using? Brave. Okay. Anyone else? This is a very special crowd. Typically, you admit to Edge. Okay. Well, Chrome. Okay. Well, what's interesting about web browsers is obviously every web browser in the world is based on open standards. They're all rely on HTML and HTTP and JavaScript and all the other open standards that really are the bedrock of the internet we all use and hopefully love. But every web browser I know of is not just based on open standards. It is also based on open source software. Google Chrome and Microsoft Edge and the Opera browser and the Samsung browser are all based on software called Blink, sometimes referred to as a rendering engine, sometimes called the browser engine. Whatever you call it, it's basically a suite of open source software components. And even Apple's Safari is based on another open source project called WebKit. So why do they use open source software? In our opinion, there are really four key reasons. The first one is it's simply cheaper. If Steve and I are competing and we want to create web browsers, most likely the core technology is something we all need. So it makes sense to cooperate on that and have his developers and my developers work together on the fundamental code. Now, maybe if you Google, you have probably all the money in the world. You don't care about saving money. But you're also going to save time. And even if you think that you have both all the money in the world and all the time in the world, if you have a great open source community, a great community of developers, open source can be safer than proprietary software. because you have a diverse group of people looking at code. We're going to find weaknesses, hopefully before those weaknesses are being exploited. And even if they are exploited, if we have a lot of developers and Nats developers find a solution for the problem, I get to use it and vice versa. So in my opinion, open source software coupled with a great and diverse community is very good for security. And last, but certainly not least, it's really important for interoperability. And you might say, well, if we have open standards, why do we need open source software for interoperability? Well, it's a little bit like recipes. You know, if the two of us are cooking something and we work off the same recipe, but we use different ingredients, we interpret those recipes a bit differently, we will end up with dishes that taste a little bit different. Now, in terms of something to eat, that's probably a good thing. You know, I will enjoy the variety, but in technical terms, that reintroduces friction. So if you want interoperability, it's actually easier to have a shared basis of open source community, of open source components. I'm old enough to remember a time where you visited websites and the website would say, this is optimized for Internet Explorer. And, you know, if you came with a Netscape browser, it was a terrible experience. Because of those open source projects, you know, this is less and less of a problem. So the basic idea is simply to say that what works so well for browsers would be a good role model for wallets. On the next slide, this looks a bit different than it should look, but you know, we're basically thinking that wallets should be based on open source software because it's cheaper, because it's faster, and because it's great for interoperability. On the next slide, you see how we are looking at this. So it's more or less the same picture. You know, obviously for wallets as well, you have a lot of open standards, probably even more standards than in the browser space. You know, any vertical you look at, let's say digital identity, for instance, and let's say credential formats, you have ISO MDL and MDoc, you have anon-creds and W3C verifiable credentials and SD-JOTs, and then you have so many protocols how to communicate those credentials. You can use DITCOM, you can use OpenID for verifiable credentials. And even if you are within DITCOM, how many DIT methods are there today? I lost count, but it's definitely over 100 different DITs. It's, you know, it's a lot of standards. And that's just the identity part. And then you look at payments and you look at tokenizing credit cards and debit cards, and you have the MDES standard and the VDES standard. And then you look at wallets as a home for car keys, and that's the CCC standard. But if the door is not attached to a car, but your hotel room, then it's not the CCC standard, it's an IETF standard. And this is a very, very complicated area, but needless to say, there are a lot of standards, open standards, hopefully, and you know, obviously they're important for wallets. In the wallet space, you also have a lot of rules, and the rules are almost as different as the standards. You have different rules based on the use case, and you have very different rules based on the jurisdiction. And on top of it all, you're going to have the wallets. And you know, some of those wallets are one-trick ponies. They're single-purpose wallets. They're trying to do one thing, hopefully one thing well. But a lot of wallets in the future are going to be multi-purpose wallets. Imagine after this conference, you're going to a high street shop for a physical wallet. You want to buy a new wallet. And I'll show you a wallet and you like the color and the texture and the design, and you're about to buy that wallet. And then I say, actually, there's one thing you should know. It will only work for your driver's license. And you'll say, so I cannot put my credit card in that wallet? And I say, no, you cannot. No cash, no credit card, just a one-trick pony. It works for your driver's license. I don't know about you, but I think many people, including me, will hesitate to buy that wallet and say, you know what, no, I'll actually stick to a wallet that I can use for many different use cases. So I think a lot of users will have an innate preference for multi-purpose wallets. And these multi-purpose wallets are also going to be very good for many use cases, because in many use cases, you want to be able to prove your identity and have a store of value, have crypto assets in that wallet, for instance. If you rent a car, it would be very useful to be able to prove who you are, prove that you have a driver's license, be able to sign the contract and pay for that car. So you have a lot of different functions that ideally you want to be able to use at the same time with the same consent. So the idea is that these multi-purpose wallets that are going to have to incorporate so many different standards and have to live with so many different rules are going to massively benefit by components, open source components that allow for this interoperability. You know, in an ideal world, a few of us would get together and say, let's agree on one standard and let's agree on one set of rules for every use case in every country in the world. It might be ideal, but it's just not going to happen. So wallets in many ways are like trains that go from one use case to another, from one country to another. And as they cross use cases and countries, the width of the train track changes. The electricity the train uses changes, or maybe there are countries where there is no electricity at all and you're still running on diesel. So if you cannot prevent that complexity, how about creating building blocks for these trains? And as the train is leaving one use case to another, as the train is crossing from one country to another, at least it becomes easier for the train to adapt to these realities. So this is what we're trying to do. On the next slide, you see how we're trying to do it. I approached the Linux Foundation with this idea about a year ago. The Linux Foundation is probably known to most of you. It's the world's largest open source project. I was actually surprised because I had only known about Linux as essentially the foundation, the home for the Linux operating system. But the Linux Foundation is comprised of almost 1,000 different projects. If you use, cloud native Kubernetes, for instance, that's a Linux Foundation project. When Meta, Facebook outsourced their AI technology and software, they outsourced it to the PyTorch Foundation, which is again a Linux Foundation project. So the Open Wallet Foundation is a project that I co-founded with the Linux Foundation. And the structure is in some ways very similar to a typical Linux Foundation project. You have sponsors that are interested in this space, and they're basically giving money to the project so that the Open Wallet Foundation can hire a CTO and an executive director, and that the Open Wallet Foundation is able to give money to projects. And if you sponsor the Open Wallet Foundation, what you get in return is essentially control over how the money you're giving is spent, which I think is a fair trade-off. Then you have really critically the developers. The developers are coming to the Open Wallet Foundation with their code. It can be individual developers, anyone, any one person developing code, or a company like Google. It doesn't really matter. If you have code and you're interested, A, to open source that code, but B, to work in an open governance situation where you come together with other people, with other developers to work on shared code, this is an invitation to join. And the developers and the maintainers contributing code to Open Wallet stay in control. The board of the Open Wallet Foundation, the Technical Advisory Council, is not going to tell you as a developer what you can and cannot do with your code. It's not going to force you to merge your code with someone else's code. It remains your project. But the Open Wallet Foundation is a neutral home for you to work in a safe space that recognizes antitrust and IP challenges to work with others on your code. And if you have a project that is very mature, you are adding people to the Technical Advisory Council, which is the highest body the Open Wallet Foundation has in terms of determining whether a project or not can join. And we want to be really inclusive, but if someone is trying to join a blockchain project, for instance, some distributed ledger project, we would probably say, maybe there are other places that are better for that particular code. But the basic idea is anything that has to do with wallets and agents is welcome. And the Technical Advisory Council is going to decide. Then you have a community function here at the lower left-hand side. And we have community members, for instance, like the OpenID Foundation that Net is representing here, or Hyperledger. We just announced relationships with EMVCo in the credit card space, or with the FIDO Alliance because of the importance of passkeys. We're also in very good conversations with civil society organizations. So the idea is really that there are a lot of different community members that are able to come in and make themselves heard. And on the previous slide, you remember probably that you had the rules on the lower right-hand side. So this is something that is really unusual for a Linux Foundation project. We have a governmental advisory council. This is something we blatantly copied from ICANN, the global domain name system. And the idea is super simple. When you think about those multi-purpose wallets and what you will have in those wallets, some of those credentials are going to be private. Your credit card, your debit card, your car keys, an airline ticket, maybe a currency that has a private issuer. But a lot of those contents is going to be public, maybe a CBDC, maybe a digital identity card, maybe a green card. So if wallets ultimately are going to be the vessels for components that are private as well as components that are public, we believe that wallets should reflect a public-private partnership, should reflect the intent of the public sector and the private sector to create a multi-stakeholder community of saying, let's not work against each other. Let's work on digital wallets that act as digital public infrastructure, that act in the interest of society at large rather than the interest of any one publisher, whether that's a single country or a single company. And I didn't say that at the beginning, but please interrupt me whenever I say something that is either not clear or you think it's stupid or you have a better idea. Please do interrupt and let me know. Okay, so this is how we're trying to do it. What's important is governments nominate people to the Governmental Advisory Council. And we haven't really talked much about the Governmental Advisory Council, but we're going to do that before the end of the year. We have so far 10 countries that officially joined. We are in advanced discussions with the United States of America, 2 different departments, but they're not one of the 10 yet. But we're very happy with the Governmental Advisory Council because very small countries like the Kingdom of Bhutan are represented, and somewhat larger countries like China or the United Kingdom or Sweden or Portugal, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina have all already agreed to join the Governmental Advisory Council. On the next slide, you see quickly, who's going to be a member of the Open Wallet Foundation. And as I said, the Open Wallet Foundation is still in diapers. We are going to be, today is the 21st. So in 2 days, we're going to be 9 months old. So this is really a toddler, but it's a toddler that is starting to at least crawl. We're super happy that we launched with 36 members. We now have 55. Google and Microsoft both joined within the first 6 months of the Open Wallet Foundation. And what I like personally is the diversity. So you see some very large companies here, you see some very innovative startups here. And in my opinion, this is going to be the strength of the Open Wallet Foundation. This should not be a club of billion and trillion dollar companies, but it should also not be something that is just exclusively open to very young startups. In our opinion, diversity is going to be absolutely critical for the success of the Open Wallet Foundation. And Google and Microsoft. I hope I did not say Apple. If so, that was, I love Apple, and I very much hope that eventually everyone's going to be there, but no Apple announcement yet. What you also see here is, a lot of nonprofits, and that's really a feature and not a bug. We also have 26 universities that we work with, which is really awesome. Wallets will be super important for education and academic purposes. This is where you will be able to prove that you went to MIT or Harvard or the University of Sydney. And on the next slide, you see some of those nonprofit members and the first two liaison agreements with the FIDO Alliance and with EMVCO. We have announced those two relationships just recently at Money 2020 in Las Vegas. And you're going to see a lot more on what we're going to do on top of FIDO standards and on top of EMVCO standards. But the idea is that we work together with the FIDO Alliance and with EMVCO basically to identify the FIDO members and the EMVCO members who are interested to create open source software together on top of these standards. On the next slide.
Just a moment. For the remote users, please use the microphone.
The question is if there are any governments or government agencies in
Yes. So we will announce the Governmental Advisory Council later this year. The first meeting of the Governmental Advisory Council is going to be on Thursday of this week. We have 10 countries that are officially represented at the moment. I think I mentioned some of them, like Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, Sweden, Portugal. China actually is going to be one of those countries, which was the first really controversial thing that I helped push through. In my opinion, if you have the aspiration to create a global wallet ecosystem, it is completely preposterous to try and do that without China. And it's one of the beautiful aspects of open source software. No one is going to put in code into open wallet libraries without having to fully disclose what it is. So I personally could not be happier to see that China is taking an active role. And we at the last board meeting, when we announced that we had country number 10 join, a board member said this was really good. And I said, well, how many countries are there? I think 196. So this is just a fraction of the ambition. The goal really is for every country in the world to be at the table and have a seat in the Open Wallet Foundation, at least one, because when you think about it, what is the organization in a country that should be represented in terms of wallets? Should it be the Treasury Department or the Department of Homeland Security? Or maybe it should be someone, looking at it from an academic perspective or from a healthcare perspective. So we really welcome not just one representative per country, but we welcome anyone from any governmental agency that feels that wallets, that secure interoperable wallets are vital for providing public services. So you see here a couple of the countries that are there. And if anyone here is representing a country or knows someone who represents a country, you see the email address.
Thank you. I appreciate this effort. Identity remains still a priority at the White House, although they announced an identity EO 2 years running. It will be published in the coming weeks, and we'll see if it comes out. That number of weeks is a high number at this point. But I am curious, what types of agencies are you seeing more consistently that you're getting the standards agencies, or are you getting the immigration agencies, the issuers of credentials like state for passports in the US, or the equivalent of driver's license issuers? Like what types of stakeholders are you tending to get, understanding that you're probably hoping for all of it to be represented, but I'm curious what you're seeing in current participation.
Yeah, I know this was an object question, but the answer is still yes. As in, we get actually all of that, and we get quite a bit of diversity. You know, the last organization that has told us that they will join is NIST, which is amazing. Now, NIST cannot join as a participant because they are not representing the United States government, but they are basically an observer on the Governmental Advisory Council. We are working with the Department of Homeland Security, for instance, because they care about wallets, but other government agencies in the US and anywhere around the world care about wallets as well. So we really want to be inclusive also in terms of who can be there. If you can credibly say that you have an interest in wallets, you should really be welcome, I think. And the main focus for the Governmental Advisory Council is not to vote, but to enable two-way conversations and give governments the ability to meet the developers and developers an ability to meet government officials. In the rare cases where the GAC is going to vote, that's the only caveat. If a country has 20 different representatives from 20 different agencies, they get one vote.
There's many governments that issue or manage identities that are not countries. So, for example, driver's licenses in Australia are from state governments. Is that also part of the kind of vision here?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. You have that actually on many different levels, not only with driver's licenses, but also the provinces in Canada, for instance, play a lot of role in terms of identity. So we're inclusive there too, and say you can participate on a regional level, you can participate on a national level, as long as you are representing the public sector. And, I mentioned NIST as an observer. Another observer is, for instance, AMVA, the American Association of Motor Vehicle Agencies. And, they are representing basically a couple of those DMVs. I know that we're 1 minute over time. You need to, maybe we could rush through 2 more slides. Is that, I think you are chairing this, right? Nat, are you the person to ask? I'm not sure who to ask for permission. I need to ask you, can we rush through 2 more slides? Okay, so on the next slide, you see basically a couple of those use cases. This is not, a full list. I think there is even more, but this is a very, very big field. And it's interesting that when you talk to consumers about wallets, they typically think about all those things. When you talk to people in the industry, typically, we have these déformations professionnelles. We think about wallets and say, sure, this is for crypto assets. Oh, yes, wallets, that's of course for identity assets. I think it's very useful to create a really big tent and bring developers together in all of those areas to create open source components. On the next slide, you see a little bit of how those components look like. I don't have enough time to get into detail, but I can tell you I had nightmares at the beginning of the year as we launched the Open Wallet Foundation without code, that we would be the only open source project in the world at the end of the year without open source projects. And thankfully, this has not happened. A lot of entities from small developers. We have, for instance, SDJots, the 3 people that pioneered the concept for SDJots. They have 3 different reference libraries. They're all being brought into Open Wallet. And those are really individual developers that say, I have built a reference library. I want a neutral place for this code. And they decided to add code to Open Wallet. But we also have Google that already contributed the Android identity credential, which is going to be renamed, which is used by a lot of wallets around the world. Ping is contributing code that Apple is using in the Apple Wallet. Google has internally identified 2 more code projects, so they're not just there for show. They're really a very, very active partner, and we are thrilled with their contributions. Mosip, for instance, the open source cousin of Aadhaar, contributes code. that allows accessing the NFC and the Bluetooth chip, which we believe is going to be super useful for a lot of projects in the space. And we have a long pipeline of about 40 projects. Every TAC meeting is open. Anyone can dial in. You don't have to be a member. And you'll hear every week, basically, the TAC now agreeing to bringing in more projects. On the next slide, you see basically the value proposition of what the Open Wallet Foundation is providing to projects. It's essentially an infrastructure work. So of course it's GitHub libraries and Discord. It is best practices. You learn from the Linux Foundation, what in the past worked well, what didn't work well for open source projects. We are helping with community engagement, really to build a community around the project that you're bringing in. And we also have a strategy part. So we are trying to look at the total landscape of projects. And while we will never force any one developer to work with any other developer, I half jokingly said that we want to be a Tinder for developers. We want to be basically a place where developers meet other developers, projects meet other projects. And then, if they develop an appetite to work together, that's great. And if they want to stay independent, that is also fine. I think we have one more slide and then I bring this to a close. So what we are trying to do is essentially to bring every stakeholder together that is interested to create an ecosystem where data, where credentials or other data flows freely, to ultimately enable user choice and to enable an ecosystem that is both secure and privacy preserving. The vision that I have personally in mind for this mimics net neutrality. When you think about it, wallets are not going, for most companies at least, and for most governments, wallets, in my opinion, should not be a business model. You should not be in the wallet space because you want to extract money out of transactions or data out of transactions, create a walled garden around your wallet. Wallets should be digital public infrastructure in the best sense of the word. And the wallet should not act in the interest of the publisher, but in the interest of whoever is holding that wallet. So if we cannot make money with wallets, if wallets are something we all need, we may as well come together and develop these wallets jointly. That's what we're trying to do. Thank you.